The notification came in at 6:47 on a Sunday morning, while I was still in the hotel bathroom washing off the last of my bridesmaid makeup from the night before. It was an automated message from my bank, a balance alert, the kind you set up when a large transaction hits your account. $74,216, gone. I remember staring at my reflection for a long moment. The smudged eyeliner I hadn't finished removing. The small silver earrings my mother had picked out for me to wear at my sister's wedding. I remember thinking, very calmly, that I needed to read the number again. So I did. And it was still zero. My name is Maya. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed physical therapist who spent 3 years getting up at 5 in the morning, taking extra weekend shifts, skipping vacations, and eating lunch at my desk. $74,000 was my down payment for a house. It was the closest thing I'd ever had to proof that my life was actually going somewhere. And on the morning after my sister's wedding, while the rest of my family was still asleep in their hotel rooms, it had disappeared. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without context. My family is what people who study psychology might politely call enmeshed. My mother, Diane, is the kind of woman who calls herself a martyr in the same breath she uses to ask for a favor. She has a gift for making you feel guilty about things that haven't happened yet. My father, Glenn, is quieter about it. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, just strategic. He lets my mother do the talking and then appears at the end to collect whatever she's loosened for him. Growing up, I was the responsible one. My younger sister, Bree, was the favorite, mostly because she never pushed back on anything. I pushed back. Not loudly, but I asked questions, and in my family, questions were treated like accusations. When I graduated, got my license, and started building a real career, my parents reacted the way I'd learned to expect, with enthusiasm disguised as entitlement. Suddenly, I was doing well, which meant, in their logic, that I had something to share. There were small asks at first. A loan for a car repair that was never repaid, help with a utility bill, a birthday gift that cost 4 times what anyone bought me. I gave because I loved them, and because the guilt of not giving was heavier than the cost of giving. 3 years ago, I stopped doing that. Not dramatically. I just started saying no with a smile, and eventually the asks slowed down. I thought we'd reached an understanding. I thought wrong. Bree's wedding was in Savannah, Georgia. 3 days at a historic inn, 200 guests, a budget that my parents kept describing as modest despite clear evidence to the contrary. I flew in from Charlotte, where I live, and for 3 days I played my role perfectly. I smiled in every photo. I gave a toast that made people cry. I carried the train of Bree's dress up a cobblestone path in heels that destroyed my ankles. On Friday, the day before the ceremony, my mother came to my room with what she called a practical question. She said that she and my father were handling some of the vendor payments in cash that weekend and that their account was temporarily in a strange state because of a wire transfer mix-up with the wedding planner. She asked if she could be added temporarily to my checking account, just to cover any gaps over the weekend if something came up. She said she'd done the same thing with Bree's account, and it was just a logistical precaution. I want to be honest about something. I hesitated. There was a version of me that heard that request and felt the old familiar alarm. But my mother was standing in my doorway in a pale blue dress, looking tired and genuinely stressed. And it was the weekend of my sister's wedding, and I told myself that I was being paranoid. I added her to the account. It took 7 minutes on my banking app. I handed her my phone to confirm the verification code that came through because my hands were full with a garment bag, and she completed the process herself. That was Friday afternoon. By Sunday morning, she had transferred every dollar I owned to an account I didn't recognize. I sat on the edge of the hotel bathtub for a long time. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that, not because I think crying is weakness, but because what I felt wasn't grief. It was something colder, something that had been waiting a long time to be confirmed. I called the bank first. The representative confirmed that the transfer had been authorized through the joint account access and that a hold and investigation could be initiated but would take time. I said yes to all of it. I took notes. I asked for the reference numbers and wrote them on the notepad next to the hotel phone because my hands were too unsteady to type. Then I got dressed. I went downstairs to the hotel brunch that had been organized for the wedding party. My mother was already there, at the center of a table of relatives, laughing at something my uncle had said. She looked relaxed in a way that told me she'd slept well. I sat down. I ate something. I don't remember what. And when there was a natural pause in the conversation and most of the table had drifted into smaller groups, I looked at my mother and said quietly, "I need to talk to you about my account." She didn't flinch right away. She picked up her coffee cup first. Then she said, I was going to call you today, actually. The money is gone, I said. All of it. She set the cup down. Maya, your father is in a very serious situation. I know, I said. I can see that. She started to explain. Her voice was low and careful, the voice she uses when she's already decided the conversation is over and she's just managing the transition. My father had borrowed money. She used the word borrowed, not stolen, not gambled, not lost from two of his business partners to cover some personal debts. He needed to make them whole before the end of the month or they were going to escalate the situation. She said, escalate the situation the way someone says it when they mean something specific and don't want to say it directly. The money from my account was going to settle that and buy them time to figure out the rest. I looked at her for a moment. You took my down payment to pay off Dad's debt. You're 31, she said. You're healthy. You're employed. You'll earn it back. There it was. I remember the table feeling very far away suddenly, the way a room sounds when your ears are adjusting to altitude. I thought about 3 years of early mornings. I thought about the house I had been looking at in a neighborhood called Glenwood, a small craftsman with a yellow door and a porch big enough for a chair and a plant. I thought about how I had believed, genuinely believed, that I was past this, that I had gotten far enough away that they could no longer reach me. I understand, I said. And then I picked up my bag, excused myself from the table, walked out through the hotel lobby, sat in my rental car in the parking garage, and spent 2 hours on my phone. First, I called a lawyer, not a family friend, not someone my mother knew, a stranger I found through a bar association directory, a woman who specialized in civil fraud cases and had a Sunday emergency line. I left a message explaining the situation in as much detail as I could. Then I called the bank again and escalated to the fraud department. Then I made a list. By the time I flew back to Charlotte Monday morning, I had a consultation scheduled for Tuesday, a case number with the bank's fraud unit, and 3 months of account statements printed from the hotel business center and packed into my carry-on. I had also texted my sister and told her I was so happy for her and that I hoped the honeymoon was beautiful, because it wasn't Bree's fault, and because I was already thinking clearly enough to know who my allies were. The lawyer's name was Patricia. She was 60-something, direct in the way that only people who have stopped trying to be liked can be, and she listened to everything I told her, without writing anything down for the first 10 minutes. Then she started writing and didn't stop for a while. What I didn't know when I walked into her office was that the situation was more complicated than I'd thought, which, it turned out, meant it was also more actionable than I'd thought. My father's situation wasn't simply personal debt. Patricia had me pull some documents, do some digging, make a few calls to people who knew people. What emerged over the following 2 weeks was a picture I recognized in outline, even if the specific details were new. My father had been operating what amounted to a small, informal investment scheme with a group of people he'd met through a local business network. He'd taken money from 6 individuals over the course of 4 years, promising returns on real estate investments that existed mostly on paper. Some of those people were family acquaintances. One of them was my uncle on my father's side, who hadn't said anything because he was embarrassed. My mother knew. Not everything, not every detail, but enough. The transfer from my account wasn't a desperate improvisation. It was part of a pattern of plugging holes, buying time, keeping the structure standing a little longer. I was just the next available resource. Patricia filed a civil suit. The bank's fraud investigation supported the claim that the transfer, while technically authorized through joint access, they had been obtained through misrepresentation. My mother had told me the access was for wedding logistics, not for the transfer of funds. The account had been added under false pretenses. That mattered. It took 4 months. I won't pretend those 4 months were easy. My mother called me 12 times in the first 2 weeks. I let all of them go to voicemail. Some of the messages were angry, she said. I was humiliating the family, that I was doing this to punish her, that I had always been difficult. Some of the messages were sad, and those were harder, because even now there is a part of me that loves my mother the way you love, a place that hurt you, with grief and muscle memory. I listened to all of them. I didn't call back. My father called once. He left a voicemail that was 3 minutes long and said very little that was useful. He said he was sorry I felt this way. He said he had been under enormous pressure. He said the money would be paid back. He just needed time. He never said he was sorry for taking it. He said, sorry I felt this way, which is a different thing entirely. Bree called me in the 3rd week. I was nervous to answer, but I did. She was quiet for a moment after I explained the full situation. Then she said, Maya, I need to tell you something. Mom asked me the same thing, about adding her to my account. Did you do it? I asked. No, she said. I said I didn't have access to my phone. I kept stalling and she stopped asking. She paused again. I should have warned you. I'm so sorry. That was the moment I cried. Not when I saw the zero balance. Not when my mother told me I was young and healthy and would earn it back. Not during any of the 4 months of legal proceedings. But when my little sister, who I had spent a lifetime protecting from the truth about our family, told me she already knew and had quietly protected herself, I sat down on my kitchen floor and cried for about 20 minutes. She flew to Charlotte the following weekend. We ate takeout on my couch and she told me things I hadn't known, about money she'd seen, moved, conversations she'd overheard, a notebook she'd found in my father's desk drawer years ago that listed names and numbers that hadn't made sense to her at the time. She gave me everything she remembered. It helped. The civil case settled before trial. My parents' attorney advised them against litigation once the full scope of the fraud documentation came together. The settlement required full repayment of the $74,000, plus legal costs, a structured timeline enforced by the court, and a lien on my parents' house to secure the repayment. They did not lose the house, at least not from my case. Whether they kept it afterward was going to depend on the separate matter that the district attorney's office had taken up based on the complaints from my father's other investors. I was not involved in the criminal case. I gave a statement once, and then Patricia handled the rest. The last update I received was that my father had entered a plea agreement that included supervised probation, mandatory repayment to all affected parties, and a financial restrictions order that prevented him from soliciting investments for 10 years. My mother received a civil judgment and probation as well for her role in the transfer. I didn't go to the hearings. I had taken enough days off work. The repayment came in structured installments, the first of which arrived in my account on a Tuesday morning in February. I was eating breakfast when the notification came in. I looked at the number, and then I kept eating my breakfast because I had a patient at 8 o'clock and the eggs were going to get cold. I want to tell you what happened to the house with the yellow door. It sold 3 months before I had the money back. I drove past it once, after the sign came down, and there were children's shoes on the porch and a bicycle leaned against the railing. I sat in my car for a moment and then I drove home. I was not as sad about it as I expected to be, and I thought about that for a while. I think what I had wanted was not that specific house, but what it represented, proof that I had built something that was mine, that couldn't be reached, that no one could walk into my hotel bathroom and take in 7 minutes on a Sunday morning. The next house I found had a green door, a little bigger, better light in the kitchen. I moved in on a Saturday in April with Bree and 2 of my friends from work and a rented truck. My parents were not there. That was not an accident. People ask me sometimes because this story has a way of coming out, the way real things do, whether I feel guilty about taking legal action against my own parents, whether I think I went too far. I understand why they ask. I've thought about it honestly, the way you have to think about things you've already done. Here is what I know. My father built a structure designed to extract from people he was supposed to care for. And when it started to collapse, he used my mother to reach into my savings and take what I had spent years earning. My mother stood in a hotel room in a pale blue dress and looked me in the eyes and handed me a story about wire transfers and wedding vendors, and then she completed the transfer herself from my own phone. These were not accidents of desperation. They required planning and deception and a very specific belief that I would either not find out or not do anything about it. I was supposed to be a resource that renewed itself quietly and never asked for anything back. I love my parents. I want to say that plainly because it's true, and because pretending it isn't wouldn't honor how hard this actually was. I love them the way you love something you've had to learn to grieve before it's gone. But love is not the same as permission. And forgiveness, I've decided, is something I can work on privately, in my own time, without it requiring me to pretend the thing that happened didn't happen. Bree and her husband came for the holidays this year. We made dinner together in my kitchen with the good light. She brought a plant as a housewarming gift, something green and low maintenance, and I put it on the windowsill above the sink where it gets the afternoon sun. We talked about everything except our parents, and then at some point we talked about them too, because that's how it goes. We didn't fix anything. We just named it and ate dinner and cleaned up together, and that was enough. I still work the early shifts